all my relations, welcome to another program, Eagle and Condor. This is Tony Gonzales, your host today, Sunday, March the 24th. And today, indeed, my relatives, a very special occasion. I've invited a very special guest. Her name is Lakota Harden, and this is for the occasion here, International Women's History Month. And I wanted her to have closing words for this month on behalf of AIM West and the Eagle and Condor. Her story, her life story, her involvement in the movement, particularly the American Indian movement, my relatives. So tune in with that. And shortly after that interview, we'll be screening the film documentary WarriorWomen. And it's a film about Madonna Thunderhawk and her daughter, Marcella Gilbert, and a few other women, which will include Lakota Harden as well. And the film was produced by Elizabeth Castle and co-directed by Christine D. King. So we want to give them credit for this beautiful documentary feature film. It's over an hour, so really sit back and enjoy that, my relatives. And indeed, if you want more information on how you can have access to that film yourself, WarriorWomen, you can go to their educational distributor at Good Doc, and that's at outreach@gooddocs.net. outreach@gooddocs.net for a copy of that film and how you can help with further distribution, my relatives. But before we get into the interview and the film screening of WarriorWomen, I just want to make a few announcements, my relatives. I have a very good friend, a friend indeed from Vietnam I met 1969. His name is David Rodriguez. We call him the Rod, and the Rod is out in Fresno. He's in the hospital in St. Agnes, and my relatives, he needs our prayers, our healing prayers. He has cancer, and he is a dear friend. So let's pray for his healing during this time, my relatives. Also, another sad announcement, that is the passing of Marcus Miles Martinez, who we call him by Red Bear, and Red Bear out by Santa Rosa. He passed away, my relatives, on March the 7th. And he was a man always seeking justice for his people. He will be missed. And if you wish to help the family with the funeral and all those expenses and help the family, you can call Elizabeth at area code 707-494-8505, my relatives. And that's for Marcus Martinez family. That's Red Bear family. You can call them again, 707-494-8505, my relatives. And just back to David Rodriguez, the Rod, I talked to you about him needing prayers. I had interviewed him last November, some of you might recall, for during the time of Veterans Day around November the 11th. And he talked about his life story and his experience in Vietnam. So that's David Rodriguez, my relatives. And also, don't forget the 50th anniversary. That's 50 anniversary of the International Indian Treaty Council. That's the international arm of the American Indian movement. And the International Indian Treaty Council has status at the United Nations. They're having a conference in June 21 through the 24 out in Standing Rock, South Dakota. For more information, you can call or write iitc.org, my relatives. Also, Cesar Chavez's birthday is coming up, the end of March 31. On Monday, it's recognized by the state of California. It's a federal day of recognition, but in California, there'll be parades and celebrations on Saturday, March 30 in Santa Cruz at Barrios Unidos. They're hosting a program and a featured guest speaker, and that's Gloria Hernandez. So try to make that in Santa Cruz at Barrios Unidos. For more information, Barrios Unidos, my relatives. All right, let's go into that interview with Lakota Harden on behalf of International Women History Month. Hello, my relatives. Welcome once again to Eagle and Condor. And we're brought to you every Sunday, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time out of San Francisco, Channel 29. That's BAVAC. You can catch us on live streaming, SFC TV, or you can go to the AIM website at aim-west.org. Just scroll down, and Eagle and Condor is brought to you live streaming. And my relatives, today, very special occasion. We hope to be broadcasting to you Sunday, March the 24th. And I've invited a good, dear friend of ours in the Bay Area and throughout Indian country, and that is Miss Lakota Harden. And I've invited Lakotas, especially Lakota, this being International Women's History Month. I wanted to talk to you since I've known you like for decades, over 30, maybe, shall we say, nearly 40 years. Yes. And we've never sat down to talk about each other's lives, but I want to take the opportunity to ask of you your time on this occasion as a woman achiever, a woman warrior, from the grassroots to the top of the world. You've been active all throughout. And you in particular, like an AIM child, American Indian Movement child born in a family and in the movement, for our listeners and our friends, a lot of times we see a lot of in movement leadership coming from the voices of men, from Dennis Banks to Clyde Belcourt to the past, Russell Means, even today, Bill Means. We have Lenny Foster, but we hardly hear women. And Madonna Thunderhawk comes to mind, and a particular film that she was involved in, that you yourself as well, and that is WarriorWomen. And we hope to have that screened today after the interview with Lakota. But just on the quick, Lakota, it's always the men that are talking, but we all know now it's become more clear and true that women have been the backbone in the movement and practically around the world. So if you can share with us, if you can introduce yourself, your tribe, your nation, and then please, if you can share with us some of your activities up to the present, if you can, please. Lakota Harden.
Hamidakuapi, Tashina Skawi Imachiapi, Mea Malakota na Ho-Chunk, also Hunkad Deshitan clan of the Tlingit people. Greetings, my relatives. I come to you from Shitka, which is Tlingit Ani. I'm currently in Sitka, Alaska. I have traveled all over, and I just got here today. And part of that is because I think for us as Indigenous people or Native people, we make relatives wherever we go. And our relatives are everyone. When we say in Lakota language, Midakwiyase, it means that we are related to everything, including the water and the trees and the animals and everything around us that Grandmother Earth has given us. And for me, Tony did mention that I was raised in the American Indian Movement, and we recently had our 50th anniversary in Rapid City just a few weeks ago. At the 51st anniversary of the Wounded Knee takeover, we had our 50th anniversary for the We Will Remember Survival Group, which was an AIM school that came out of the Wounded Knee takeover, started by Madonna Thunderhawk and Ted Means. They got together after Wounded Knee and said, we have to do something. We have to teach our kids. And of course, our family, when I was talking at the reunion, I said, well, our family has always been AIM, even before there was AIM, because we were raised by matriarchs in our family. We had some of the earliest stories I heard of was with my great-great-grandmother in her 90s. When I was 7, I got to spend time with her. And she had chosen to become a minister when natives weren't ministers, or women weren't ministers, but she became one because they were stealing our children and taking them to these boarding schools, these Christian boarding schools. So she insisted that she become one so she could see where they're taking our children. So hearing those stories and hearing her life story, and it's all included in Russell Means's book, Where White Men Fear to Tread. He talks about our early years, where our family came from. But for me, where I started was at that time my great grandmother, Twinkle Star, who helped raise all of the Means brothers and my mom and her sisters. They were all raised together, and then they raised us all together. So we didn't really have cousins. We were all brothers and sisters as kids. So when AIM happened, we were already living that way. And so I was raised with a lot of wisdom. And these matriarchs, Faith Feather and Theo Feather Means, the mothers, raised us all together. And that's what I remember the most, was always having a lot of family around me. And we took care of each other and made sure that we were respecting our elders, respecting what needed to happen um, for our people at a time, especially people think it's easy to be AIM, right? But it wasn't back then. In the 50s and 60s, people were very indoctrinated, the genocide had taken its hold around our throats. And we were killed if we were proud of being Native. And so nobody can blame their grandmothers or something. People always tell me that their people have forgotten, or they didn't practice, or they didn't talk about it. But our lives were at stake. It was the danger that our ancestors went through was very real. So when AIM came along, people shot at us, people hated us. We were too Indian for them. And I got a lot of that because my name is Lakota. I was given that name at birth because our family was like, we can't forget they're calling us the Sioux Indians in the Sioux Nation. So we need to remember Miema Lakota was one of my first words because we had to know in our language that we are Lakota people. So I come from a long line of resistors, and it was the women who really led us in this way, a lot of absent fathers. Of course, that doesn't, it's a reflection on how colonization have affected our men. The roles were taken away, the roles were stolen away from us. But the women's roles stayed strong because they had to, especially raising children. So I grew up with a lot of that influence, and I spent a lot of years in the front lines with my uncles and aunts. We just talked about the Run for Freedom, which started back in 1978. And it was one of the very first runs. Now they have runs all over the place. But, the guys in prison, they had just arrested Peltier, and a lot of our men were going to prison, and women were going to prison. And so as kids, we couldn't vote. We didn't have money. We were on the reservation. So we did our first Run for Freedom with a prayer staff and ran to the prison. And that was one of the first acts that people heard about. And we have this booklet that talks about the Run for Freedom. And we did that every year, and that became more of a thing, as well as the Longest Walk, which we were all a part of, the very first original Longest Walk, when thousands of Native people came together. So for myself, as me, living in two worlds and being educated in the white man's schools, I became a teacher and a student at the We Won't Remember Survival School. Mm-hmm. And I also was a spokesperson. So when we formed the Treaty Council in 76, I was considered AIM Youth, and I was able to speak. And I studied all the repressive legislation and could argue with senators at the age of 16 and 17. So people sent me around a lot. Jimmy Durham was in New York City with the Treaty Council, and he would send me all over the place. And I would argue, and I was speaking the truth. So I knew that. So no matter what any senator or somebody using big fancy words, it's like, yeah, but the truth is this is our land and we are under attack. Our water is under attack from the uranium mining that's happening, that has happened. And we are under the threat of genocide. And that was always the truth. And so whatever I said made sense. I even traveled with We Will Remember Survival School to Cuba Havana, Cuba for the International Festival of Youth and Students in 1978 and actually testified against the US government for genocidal practices. And they had so many of us lined up, Lenny Foster, myself, Jose Barrero, many of us Native people. And then when it came down to it, they only picked 4 people to testify after several had gone and there wasn't enough time. And I was one of them. And so I remember standing in that court system in Havana, Cuba, and Lenny and Ted, everybody around me saying, no, don't forget this and don't forget this.
How old were you? How old were you?
I was 20. I was 20 by then. And I had my chanupa with me. I had my sacred item with me, and I was terrified. And they had guards take you down, and there's these guys with robes and stuff, and at least 200 microphones faced at you because it was a world court. And I had 7 minutes or some really short amount of time, but I did a good job. I got a standing ovation. I think it was mostly because I was young. But I spoke the truth. So I was raised by good speakers. Even in our ceremonies, I was told that I knew who I was. And as a teenager, I was like, what does that mean? And they said, she's lucky because she knows who she is. She's a teacher. And I thought, oh no, because I didn't want to be standing in a classroom. But what I realized is all the education I was getting from my family and from the movement helped me to be a spokesperson, a teacher in so many other ways. I then went on from when we were a part of the Black Hills Alliance to save the Black Hills from the uranium mining that was being targeted. We had the International Survival Gathering in 79 and 80. So a lot of those early organizing and early gatherings, I got to meet all the important people that were activists. And what we learned from traveling around and being in different frontline activities, a lot of events and actions that were happening at the time, was that they're families, that the movement was made up of families and usually led by women. Women had to make things happen and run. And so we saw that early on, that these were families that were in resistance. And of course, that's our native way, our indigenous way of being. So that was a lot of my early teachings, was around meeting all these other families all around the country of indigenous resistance.
No, that's terrific, Lakota. It's interesting how you say you were in Cuba and how you leveled that testimony. It was an indictment true to form. I'm sure how you delivered that, and since then, and your involvement, and you mentioned the Treaty Council, and by the way, they are having their 50-year anniversary, as you say, and that's coming up June 21 to the 24 or something like that, and the public is welcome. By the way, they can go to the website at iitc.org for more information about that. And Lakota, and since you're known in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area as well, you come here frequently. You have relatives here, and you're always at Alcatraz during October, November, and you're a speaker there sometimes. Well, what other projects here in the West Coast have you been involved in? I know you've been involved in the extractive industry, protesting the oil pipelines in that area. But closer here to the Bay Area, were you involved with the Treaty Council on the Mercury in California, poisoning?
Yes. We actually went around and went to the tribal, to the different colonies, to the different communities, rancherias, the different places, to educate people about the mercury that was in the fish, especially pregnant women. So we went directly to the communities to let people know, to warn them about eating, that mercury was really strong and still in fish, and that pregnant women needed to avoid that. We need to look at that. The movie Gold, Greed, and Genocide, we would show that talked about what happened to our people, and how the land was stolen, and how it got, polluted by a lot of the mining that was happening. So there was that. And then also, the movement of Idle No More, which swept through the Bay Area, and the refinery walks that happened to draw attention, to try to put pressure on corporations to stop or to clean up after themselves, or whatever we could do, whatever we could have happen. All of those things were a part of what kind of led eventually to a recent development, and again, matriarchs involved with the Segura Te land back that has happened just recently. If you don't know about that, please, IPOC, in Indigenous Indian People Organizing for Change, has been organizing for years, and now, with the Shalmound walks that Karina Gould has led. There is land back happening. There's actual Berkeley just signed to give back a large section of land back to the Ohlone people, to the Segura Te group there. So that's a recent victory.
But and if I may say, Lakota, there, and it's a grand occasion that happened. I think it's 2.5 acres, and it was in part a generous donor that contributed over $20 million toward that land and for the indigenous peoples, for change, and Karina Gould leading that. And many times we've been talking about land acknowledgement, but here it's land back, from land acknowledgement as a struggle for the Shellmounds were 10 years or 15 years ago to the present. Now it's land back. And I'm certain with that signal of philanthropy, it will generate across the land. Other generous philanthropists and donors will work with their communities, with Indian people toward that. I'm glad you brought that up about Segura Te.
And also, Berkeley I was there when we testified and pressured the city of Berkeley to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day. And it happened. And since then, over this last decades, people have been switching from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day.
That was the first city, right?
Yes.
Across the country.
Yes.
Set the tone.
Yeah, I was there in October when we had the anniversary powwow and everything. I spoke about that. They had the original committee there, that fought for that. So that was a powerful, and to see the things that have come since then. There's so many things that we fought for. There wasn't tribal colleges and all these other things that happened. In fact, when Alcatraz happened, I mean, I know all this history because my family was there if I wasn't there.
Please.
And they wanted to make sure that, that there was a fight in the city around, when they burned down the American Indian Friendship House, and they were trying to regroup after that. And eventually, the stories that I hear, like from my auntie Mary Lee, talking about what they went through and how they partnered with the Black Panthers and all these other organizations that were fighting for our rights, our basic human rights. And eventually Alcatraz happened. So there's a lot of history and a lot of things where we have stood on the shoulders of those who lifted us up, and I always want us to remember that, because people look back, especially now for our newer generations, they look back and they have their judgments, but they have no idea how hard it really was, how targeted we really are. I mean, if you just look at Peltier, who's still in prison after all this time, we're always pushing for Leonard to be released. And the sacrifices that people made and people who were locked up, that's why the Run for Freedom was such an important part of my upbringing, and looking at always remembering who paid the price, because there's many of our people that have. And just to take it further, what I discovered, because no matter where I went in Indian country, I saw a lot of the damage to us was the same. The certain things that were about us that affected our spirit and affected our way of being. People can judge others, but we're all fighting the damage. We're all resisting and have to overcome a lot of the colonization and the genocidal tactics. So that's kind of where I went in my own personal growth and my own personal decision making was to look at the internalized oppression and where it sits in our community and how it affects us, how we have trouble working together even. And those are the things that we need to overcome, because I always learn that separately we're strong and we're powerful, but together we are a fist, and together we have so much more power and so much more gifts to offer each other. So that's always been kind of where I've, really worked with people on the issues of what gets in our way about working together. I also wanted to just try to feature this flyer. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, yes.
The Treaty Council flyer for this June.
Oh, very good.
Part of the reason I'm really interested in that is Phyllis Young, who was there right at the beginning from the Treaty Council, and also, many other people who will be there that are still around. They're going to honor my mother. People know Madonna and Mabel Ann from the film Women Warriors, that will be shown here. And we kind of gave testimony to that time. It's just one story, right? It's her story. But my mother was also involved, and my grandmother. And, I think about my mother who went to Iraq with when they had the hostage crisis back in the 80s, I think it was. And she went over there and she brought that mail back from the hostages she went with John Thomas. And he got a lot of the accolades. John Thomas is still here. He was at the Wounded Knee Memorial the last couple of years and at the survival school. So it's good to see Uncle John still here and still hanging in there strong. And my mother went with him, and she was, a part of all of this. And but the women often get forgotten and overlooked because of mainstream media. A lot of mainstream media focuses on the men, and that's always the case. But there have been matriarchs, powerful women leading. I think about the ones that took care of us, especially when we were young.
Lakota, if I can interject here, we're talking about the international mail carriers that your family, your mother, as you say, and John Thomas among those that did this deed, and it was for during the time of the hostage crisis in Iran and Tehran, and for 444 days, the U.S. soldiers were held there at the embassy, U.S. embassy. I mean, the story that you would have, your family would have, coupled with John Thomas' version of how it all came about, it would be a better movie than what we're seeing now that came out of Hollywood. What was it, Argo? Or
Yeah.
like Argo, Screw Yourself, but that Argo movie where the Canadians were taken out of Tehran, the mail carriers, and it was hand delivered from your family, John Thomas, to U.S. soldiers. That's something the State Department will always think about. But please, Lakota, if you can share with us further with your family and your projects.
Well, that was the thing, is my mother went over for some reason her existence didn't even get recorded, but she was there. She was the one that with John that was there to get the mails to go to. She said she was carrying the mail bags. I mean, that was, everybody else was in front of the cameras, and she had the bags of mail to bring them back. But I always remember this because I was a young person, and she said as soon as they opened, there was several of them that went over there, and as soon as they opened the plane door, she looked, and they were in this different world, and all the men were there, and all the women were off to the side, and they all had the burqas on, or the head coverings. So my mother immediately found a scarf in her bag, and she put it over her head, to make sure, because she was female, to respect whatever ways that were happening there.
Oh.
Yeah, so that things like that I remember, because you have to be conscious, especially when you walk into other people's communities. And so she was very respectful and was a part of that, and bringing the mail back, and how it was such a big deal, because
indeed, it was such a big deal. And the State Department, U.S. State Department, is forever beholden to the Lakota Nation and your peoples for helping do that. And please tell us about the treaties that you do have with the United States government, such as the 1868 Laramie, and tell us about the Black Hills, Lakota, just to give people a little geography about your location and that historic struggle that continues to this day, honoring treaties.
Yeah, the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, if you can get a image of it or the original Treaty Council image, we talked about the fact that when by the time that they came to the Midwest, got this far, we knew what was up. And so they called us the warlike Indians, right? But it was because we knew that they were coming to destroy. They were coming, and in our own traditional ways, we knew about what was coming. So we knew to fight for ourselves and to fight back. And those people, there's a lot of photographs and all this that were taken to show our leaders that were negotiating these treaties. And what I remember the most about that is that the land itself, they didn't want. They thought there was nothing there. And so they pushed us onto to the area where it looks like nothing grows, the plains. And they thought, okay, you could have this, because they wanted all the other rich, more green areas. And they had no idea that there was going to be gold found in the hills and all the things that came from that, which broke that treaty. But our people resisted that completely. And the guys that when I was being raised, they said they couldn't read English. They had to sign with an X. They couldn't, but they knew in their vision and in their brilliance and intelligence that someday we would have lawyers who could use that to fight for the land. So to this day, the Black Hills region of the Lakota Nation, the Hesapa, the sacred Hesapa, has never been sold. There's all these millions of dollars in escrow because they want to buy the land. And the Lakota people, the poorest nation, as far as money goes, won't accept it because we say the Black Hills are not for sale. That land is not for sale. And even though they're using it, mining and doing all this stuff right now, the Black Hills Water Alliance is fighting these corporations because they're trying to do the last bit of, damage in mining and all these other things. So there's a constant with the gold mining that's happening. So we're constantly fighting to protect the Black Hills and take care of it, because that's where we come from. That's where we're born from. That's our homelands. And that's why it's appropriate for the Treaty Council conference to be held there this year, to put that focus back on, because we will not accept the money. And, over the years, people have taken over Mount Rushmore. There was even a movie made about that called Skins. Our family has been involved with that right from the beginning. And right now, fighting the mining that's proposed to happen to destroy all the water aquifers that are there. I was just there, and that's what we're talking about, all the legislation that they're putting through. It just never ends. It's like the greed is more important than life. And for us, the water, the life of the water and everything else is more important than the money that they want to make. And that's always been the case. And it just seems like, why don't we as a human race wake up and realize we can't drink oil, we can't live without water, and those are the things we have to protect.
And Lakota, if I may ask you about your personal background, did you go through the boarding school experience? Because you're a force of nature. You're like the rose from the ashes. To have the spirit of struggle and resistance that you have. Can you share with us and how you continue today to care and understand, the dignity and the human rights of children, the boarding school era? And have you been involved in the Indian Child Welfare Act?
Yes, we've watched all of this legislation come. We've watched all of it be a part of even the Indian Religious Rights Act when that came back to be, because we were still practicing, we're still living our traditional ways of being. In fact, I tell people about my childhood, how I kind of kept my mouth shut about our ceremonies and stuff because people didn't understand it. But we were always praying our way that we had. And when it was outlawed to have our Sundances. It was outlawed to pray in the way that we did. And also, I was at 7 years old, put in boarding school, and it really affected everything about me. I've spent a lifetime trying to heal from that, but it also taught me to speak out. There were things that happened in boarding school where I spoke up as a 7-year-old, and they would whip us or torture us. But I remember standing and saying, wait, it was an accident, and telling the nun and saying this happened, and quickly explaining. And she didn't whip us. She sent us all to wherever we were supposed to go. And at 7 years old, I thought, if you speak up, you can make change happen. And that's why I've been an Eapaha in our language, what you say, a translator, somebody who explains things or tries to help people understand, because that's what we needed to do. It made a difference for me to speak up. And that's kind of been my role. And a lot of times it's even like on the longest walk, or times when I was a teenager and you just want to be a teenager, and all of a sudden there's a mic in my face and they'd say, aim youth. And then all of a sudden I'm making a speech, so it's something that I've been blessed with. It's something I was taught well, because the John Trudell and Russell Means and Madonna Thunder, all of these people were in my in my life. And I got to have good role models, and they taught me many things. And I have a story about when we were all kids sitting up in a tree, and John Trudell's walking by, and one of my cousins had a crush on him, right? And we were kind of giggling, and he looked up and he climbed up into the tree and sat in the tree with us and asked us questions. He asked us, what do you think of this rally? And what do you think of this? And and of course I ended up doing a lot of the talking, because that's kind of who I was. But yeah, so those connections are really important. And I think that's ultimately what is the message, is to be a good relative, to care for each other, and to listen to each other, and make sure everybody is protected. Because the last thing I want to say is, I remember my Uncle Ted Means, sometimes when they pass on early, or they're not in the headlines, he went to prison for us. And I remember when he went in, our whole family was lined up, and he said to us the night before, he goes, do not let them see you cry. Do not let them see you break, So we had to all stand there and watch him get locked up, and we had to keep our strong faces on, Those are the things that I had to learn early on. And, but he would always say, because when we would be organizing and figuring things out, he would say, we were talking about at the survival school gathering that they didn't tell us what to do. They said, this is what's happening. This is what's happening. What do you think you should do? And we would have to figure it out and organize it for ourselves. They taught us that way. And then they backed us up on whatever it was. And I remember being at a conference, and people were attacking us because we were speaking the truth. Other Indian people were attacking us. And I remember going to him, and I wanted him to go and beat him up. I was so sad and hurt that people were attacking us as kids. And he said, well, what do you want me to say? And I said, tell him this and tell him this. And he said, and when I got done, I was crying. I was upset. And when I got done, he goes, okay, tell him. Go back and tell him. So I did. I went back and told him, so we learned on the spot. We learned in the moment how to defend ourselves and how to speak up for ourselves. And he said, none of us are free unless all of us are free. If there's one person it's not working for, then it's not working. So that's what I would like to say to everybody. We have to fight for the rights of everybody. We have to defend the Palestinians, the genocide that's happening right now. We need to speak up, because we say we didn't want that to happen to Native people, but it's happening right now to Native people. And we need to speak up. We need to step up. We need to stop this genocide from happening any way we can.
Very good on that score, Lakota. And as I said, with all this activism, what you've been involved in, I mean, your background, you have kids, do you have grandkids, or
I have 14 grandkids, and I have
imagine that you have time for your family still, in ceremony and however way. Can you share with us a little bit of experience with all your family?
Well, that's the hard part for me right now. I've traveled a lot. I think my own kids get frustrated with me because I'm not the make it stay at home, make moccasins kind of grandma, but I can help them out in other ways. And I get to see them regularly. I travel a lot and I go, in fact, I'm going to see them. I just saw my other grandkids that are in Porcupine. My daughter was born in Porcupine. We buried her placenta there through ceremony. And now she, as a mother, returned home to Porcupine, and my grandkids are there being raised on that the land there. And then my son also, he's a grandfather himself. And so I have a great grandson as well. So yeah, that's the most important thing is family. And it's hard because we all want an idyllic looking situation, but it's never ideal. We live as Native people and we live in poverty conditions. We live in frustrating times. So it's not the ideal situation that I would want because I didn't plan. I didn't have a retirement plan. That's the thing about there's no AIM retirement plan. So I'm gonna work till the day I die, and I have to figure out how to help my family, how to continue to help them. I always say I'll never be rich because even if I got a lot of money, it goes to my family, and that's what it does. I have my Aunt Madonna and Mabel Ann are still fighting strong with the grandmothers group on the res, and Mabel Ann is raising her great grandchildren. Great grandchildren. She's in her 80s raising her great grandchildren. And that she should have a lot of help. She should have a lot of people there to help her. And she doesn't. And so those of us who can need to do that. And so that's my obligations are not just to my children and my grandchildren, but to all my relatives, and that makes it hard. But that's what makes us strong is we all help each other when we can. So,
and Lakota, that's why I invited you to our show, especially for this International Month, Women's History Month, and what you've accomplished through your hard life and still active. And women hold up half the sky in the world. Probably there are more women than men. So, and you're a representative today. Any closing words to women of the world and people of the world?
what I like to say to women, especially young women, is when we were at the aid school and we were learning traditional ways, there was a time when the boys were all kind of mad and saying, women didn't do this and women didn't do that. Well, yeah, in the old days, they didn't. And I went and stood in a circle and I said, I have made a commitment not to drink or smoke or and to help my elders and to take care and follow all these traditional ways so we protect our people and we fight for our people. I want you to stand in the circle if you can say the same. And nobody could stand in the circle. And I said, until this room is filled with men, I will stand here and I will fight and I will stand up. I would love to go and bead and sit somewhere or make bread or do something, but I needed to fight because we needed people to stand up. And now the world is getting more filled, but we all are warriors. We are all warrior women, warrior men. We're not in a peacetime. We are in a war zone and we need to be strong and step up because our ancestors did. They were going through the worst genocides and they still stepped up so we could be here today. So we need to step up. Hamidakayase.
Oh, Lakota Harden, thank you very much. Warrior woman.
Pilamia.
All right. Thank you very much, Lakota Harden. Oh.
Okay.